All right, welcome back to the House Judiciary Committee this Wednesday morning, May 20th. We're going to now take a look at page 5, 7, 8, the Senate proposal of amendment. And we'll have Hillary walk us through. Hard copies are being printed out right now, but we'll have Hillary kind of put it on the screen so we can see what we're looking at. And then we'll hear from Lisa Mylott after the walkthrough of the updates.
Right. Okay, to share my screen.
Yes, please.
All right. For the record, Hillary Cheddar Ames, Office of Legislative Counsel. The document that you'll have a hard copy of shortly, but will be up on the screen and you can follow there as well. Kind of a master showing all of the changes the Senate made to the bill. So it'll show internal changes and everything that is a change will be highlighted. I'll flag 6 kind of key changes up front and keep an eye out for them. The first is regarding notice of seizure. Again, remember 578, animal cruelty. We have a bunch of additional conduct, penalties, and a bunch of procedures for seizure of animals and forfeiture proceedings. That's the quick context before I jump into all the details again. Notice of seizure, the humane officer seizing an animal has to give notice of the seizure by posting always, even if the owner is present. If the owner is present, by personal service. And if a known owner is not present, best efforts at personal service or service by mail within 72 hours. So slight modification from what notice looked like coming over from the House, which was personal service, and then also posting if someone was not there, but that modifies it a little bit. And you can see exactly the language in just a moment. The Senate also added an interim security amount. The bill coming over from the House had the Director of Animal Welfare setting the amount of the security by rule. Senate Finance removed the rulemaking establishment of security and has the Director of Animal Welfare instead reporting back with the proposed security amount and schedule in December, which would then be established by legislation. But the bill still does establish an interim security amount until that kind of permanent security and schedule are established in legislation. So that's $1 a day per animal for non-livestock, for food, and $250 per animal for veterinary care if deemed necessary. And then for livestock, it's $250 a day an animal, $2.50 for food, and $500 per animal per day for veterinary care if necessary. 2 other things I'll flag, and then we can jump right into the language. One is there are 2 places where the Senate added providing for forfeiture of an animal for failure to pay the security unless a financial hardship waiver has been requested or granted. So if an owner of a seized animal requests a hearing or pursues an appeal, if they don't timely pay the required security, that results in forfeiting title to the animal unless they have made a financial waiver request. One is pending or has been granted. So it's essentially an incentive to pay, and it would not provide or would not apply to anyone who has requested a financial hardship waiver. The last one I'll flag, based on a request from DSAS, forfeiture proceedings will happen in the criminal division. So that's what happens under current law. Coming over from the House, it said civil division, and DSAS testimony before Senate Judiciary recommended that they're used to doing it in criminal, they're equipped to do it there, and that it should stay there. So, little preview, high level of the changes you're about to see, and I'll walk right through the language. So at the top, you should see master Senate changes from as passed by House. It's not an official version, but hopefully useful for our purposes today. The first changes you'll see are at the top of page 5. So this is a change to the section on what I think this committee has called simple cruelty to animals in contrast to aggravated cruelty, although the title of the section is just cruelty to animals. So this is the misdemeanor as opposed to felony offense. And this is just a technical adjustment, correcting the cross-reference on line 2 and specifying that the periodic unannounced visits may be conducted by either a humane officer or the Director of Animal Welfare. So those were suggestions from Lisa and are more clarification than large substantive changes. Feel free to stop me at any point with questions, otherwise I will keep rolling.
Yeah.
Would it make more sense just to make the director of animal welfare a humane officer?
I will defer that question to the substantive expert. When people
Yes.
speak
Who will
after
speak
me.
that? Okay.
Sorry, can you repeat that?
I was just wondering if it would make more sense to just make the director of animal welfare a humane officer, so that instead of adding them in here as another person who can do these compliance checks, have that person also be a humane officer, which would give them the authority to do other stuff that is in this statute and other things.
It might be for clarity that even if the director of animal welfare is also a humane officer, sometimes it helps to specify that it can also be that person in the way the statute refers to them. But I will defer to Lisa on whether she has any other comments.
Great. All right.
All right, moving forward, the next change will be, we've left the penalties, the offenses and penalties section. We are now into procedures. So this will be, we're leaving as I scroll the penalty section, and we will be getting into the procedures. All right, so this is page 13. We are now in section 5, which is really the procedures. So seizure, forfeiture proceedings, all the procedures related thereto. The changes that the next kind of bucket of changes to the first subsections in section 5 are all about consistency across these sections. So these next couple sections talk about statutory requirements to do certain things. One of them is to consult with the Secretary of Agriculture if there's an action related to livestock or poultry. There's a requirement to bring a vet with you to the seizure. And there's a requirement to, if the animal is voluntarily surrendered, to then have a vet examine it. Several court decisions have examined those 3 requirements and found that the state's failure to comply with those requirements is not grounds to dismiss the action or exclude evidence. This committee had made changes to some of those sections to reflect that. The Senate made some further changes that I'll point out, essentially making that consistent across those 3 requirements. One reason for that is when the legislature treats one provision differently than another, courts think it's intentional. And so if this change is only made to 1 or 2 of these provisions, there's a suggestion that, in fact, dismissal or exclusion of evidence could be an appropriate remedy for failure to comply with the requirement. So the first change, this is page 13, line 19. The Senate added that the Secretary of Agriculture, Food and Markets shall, if practicable, be consulted prior to any enforcement action related to livestock and poultry. This is a change to be consistent with the change the House made on a subsequent subsection that you already added if practicable elsewhere, and it made sense to make a similar modification here. On page 14, line 4. So this is still the requirement to consult with the Secretary of Agriculture prior to an enforcement action related to livestock or poultry. The version coming over from the House said failure to conduct that consultation shall not be grounds for dismissal of the enforcement action. The Senate added or exclusion of evidence. So you'll see in these next 3 kind of requirement sections, all of them reference that failure to comply with that statutory requirement shall not be grounds for dismissal of the enforcement action or exclusion of evidence. There are several cases I'm happy to share with the committee if interested that essentially hold that with respect to each of these subsections, and including both of them in each as a way to make sure that a court's not going to read the absence of one to be intentional. So this next provision, as I mentioned, this is for voluntary surrender. The statute requires that the humane officer have the animal examined within 72 hours by a vet. Again, that if practicable change that came over from the House in a subsection later is carried through here by as soon as reasonably practicable. The idea was the if practicable isn't the consultation, it's doing it within 72 hours. So that's the kind of parallel change to the if practicable language in the other 2 subsections. And the Senate added here, again, a kind of consistency throughout, that failure to have the animal examined, a voluntarily surrendered animal, examined and assessed within 72 hours or as soon as reasonably practicable, shall not be grounds for dismissal of the enforcement action or exclusion of evidence. The final one, this is page 15, line 6. This is that third of the requirements that I mentioned. This is bring a vet with you if you can when you go to seize an animal, when you execute a search warrant to seize an animal. Version coming over from the House said failure to be accompanied by a vet during the execution of the search warrant shall not be grounds for dismissal of the enforcement action. Senate added or exclusion of evidence. So one of the cases had the defendant had moved to exclude all the vet's evidence because it had been, I think this case was for the 72-hour requirement, had been gathered outside of the 72 hours. Court said that requirement isn't a basis to exclude evidence. Although, of course, you could make other arguments about why the evidence should be excluded, just that failure to comply with the statute isn't one of them. And it's that kind of change that's made throughout those 3 sections. So I'll pause there. Any questions about those changes?
Pretty straightforward.
Awesome. We'll keep rolling. All right, top of page 16, line 3. This is one of those technical changes made throughout. The statute refers to caretaker, but there are also places in the existing law that refer to a caregiver. And so that's the same entity or the same person or org. So this will use caretaker throughout. And remember, the custodial caretaker is the organization or group that is taking care of an animal after it's been seized and while forfeiture proceedings are ongoing. All right. Page 17, line 11, you'll also see this technical change throughout. We had some discussion about what a legal interest was, and the discussion was that it wasn't intended to encompass anything beyond an ownership interest in the animal. So throughout, you'll see legal interest change to ownership interest for clarity. Same on, this is now page 17, line 20. And now at the bottom of page 17, this is line 20, starting on line 21 and running onto page 18. This is the updated notice language that I flagged at the outset. So when a humane officer seizes an animal, they have to provide notice. So the new language, the officer, it keeps if the owner's there, the humane officer delivers copy, personal service. The Senate has added, the officer shall also give notice of this section, and this is whether or not the person is there, by conspicuously posting a copy of it at the time of the seizure in a prominent and accessible place at the location where the animal is seized. For any person who is known to claim an ownership interest in the animal and who is not present at the time of the seizure, the humane officer shall make reasonable efforts within 96 hours following the seizure to give notice of this section by personal service or by registered mail addressed to the last known address of the person. Any questions about that revised notice requirement language?
Go ahead.
So 96 hours, how many days? That's
4.
4 days.
I divided by 12. And then
Yeah. So do you have to so does the service need to be executed within the 4 days? Or so I'm just thinking the 2 ways that are suggested in here for the service is by personal service, you need a service processor, or by mail. Certainly the mail, I don't know if you could get that done in 4 days. But also the service processor can take a week, 2 weeks to do.
So as drafted, it is make reasonable efforts within 96 hours. It's not effectuate either of these forms. The way it's drafted is that if the person is not there, you do not have to effectuate personal service or by mail, have that complete before the clock starts running. I'll let Lisa speak a little bit more to kind of the scenarios that this is designed to cover. So I think there was some testimony about someone who leaves their animal and moves, but it's not clear where they are, having an option to make best efforts to try to get it to them, either in person or by mail, as at least some additional form beyond posting. I think that's really the goal of this, is that if there's a way to do something beyond posting, do your best within 4 days, but not being able to do it is not going to slow down the clock to keep moving future teams along.
Okay. Okay.
Might not be a full answer to your question, but
No,
if you
no,
still have
it-
questions
yeah.
after Lisa, happy
Yeah. Yeah. Great. Good.
to look into it further.
So just to be clear, so the language that's struck, was tack, whatever, posting.
Mhm.
Is that tack order?
Yes.
The language that replaces it doesn't say anything about that. Does it eliminate that as an option? Like,
If you'll look up on page 17, starting on line 21, it just moves. It's a little hard to see with
Okay,
this particular highlighting, but
Okay.
the same tack language that you had is moved up. The reason it's moved is that tacking is required even if the owner is
Yeah.
there. So it's kind of a tack anytime.
Now it's tack and make best efforts to reach. So then my question is, and I think we talked about this with originally for any person who's known to claim, and we were calling it a legal interest and ownership interest. Can you just remind me how that's understood? Like,
So if the humane officer is aware that like more than one person lives at the address and only one of them is there, then you still have to try to serve the person who's not there.
yeah.
Um,
And if what I'm thinking of folks who maybe, divorced families are there, they're still sharing family pet.
I think it's a little, the humane officer has to have some sense, right? So it's a person who is known to claim. It's really like known by the humane officer. So
Okay.
there's some wiggle room there. If we're not expecting humane officers to know the intricacies of every pet, right? But like if a humane officer is aware
Based
or
on like the circumstances and the information you can gather.
exactly, Lisa might be able to give a better like concrete example of what that is.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, just one other question. And so I think if I understand it correctly, then, so officer shows up, personally serves the person because they're there.
Yeah.
They also have to post it.
Correct.
Okay.
And one option is, if the animals are there, even if there isn't a known other owner, the potential that someone else with an ownership interest would show up again at the place they're seized, even who's not there. I think that's part of the idea of doubling up. But
Yeah, no, I'm all set, though, like.
all right, we'll keep moving forward. This is page 18, line 13. Again, this is the legal interest to ownership interest. And the same change is made on page 19, line 5. Page 19, line 10. So this subdivision is talking about the court holding the forfeiture hearing, when it's going to be and where it's going to be. So under current law, it happens in criminal division of Superior Court where the offense is alleged to have occurred. Coming over from the House, I think there was some discussion of, whether it could happen more quickly in the civil division or not. The DSAS testimony before the Senate Judiciary Committee was recommending that it go back to the criminal division as it is under current law, that ASAs are equipped to do it. That's where they're used to doing it, and that it won't happen any faster in civil division. But if you have further questions on that, then Kim McManus will be the best person to speak to it. Moving forward, on page 19, lines 17 through 19, you'll see that this language is stricken, referring to the amount of the security and payment schedule being set in rules adopted by the Director of Animal Welfare. This is one of several places changed to implement Senate Finance Amendment, which said, nope, you're not setting security in rulemaking. Bring your proposal back to us, and the General Assembly will do it in legislation. My understanding is that that is consistent with some of their approaches to handling money in rules, that generally they are not delegating that kind of rulemaking authority. On
I understand that helps to know that this is sort of more in line with how things are typically done. Was there discussion of it just seems a little odd to me to set something like that in statute when rules might be a little easier to, and maybe I'm wrong. I would assume rules are easier to change, slightly easier to change. I don't, maybe not. But like, you want to keep up with the cost of things and stuff, so it seems a bit odd to me to have it in statute.
So historically, I mean, we have lots of fees and we
Yeah,
bill like every other year. We just haven't done that lately. So there's a mechanism to update.
ostensibly,
Yeah. But yeah, if this is the kind of fee that we don't allow rules, I guess it seemed a little odd to me, but that's the way you do things. So
And
we'll find out from Ways and Means as well, if they agree that this is how we do things. So,
I think maybe the way I'd rephrase it is, generally there is movement away from allowing this to be done in rulemaking. So it's not necessarily like we never do this, and more of a Senate Finance described that they are moving away from doing this in rulemaking. There was not much testimony taken about kind of timing or the particular nature of this security schedule and whether that made sense to do in rule or not. Just kind of a general approach to we are moving away from doing this.
thank you.
Moving forward on page 19, line 20, this was a clarification just for readability of this section. So the section starts by saying the person needs to post security for 40 days and then every 30-day period thereafter. And then it says, without the change, the security shall be posted within 14 days following the seizure. So helpful to just clarify the initial security, the first time you're posting security, have to do it within 14 days of the seizure, unless you're requesting a financial hardship waiver. The top of page 20, lines 1 through 4. This is kind of another group of changes that just clarifies that the Director of Animal Welfare can pay out from the fund to custodial caretakers, and the director can't pay out more than came in. So I'll flag a couple instances coming up that are this category of change, just specifying, yes, the director is authorized to make payment from the fund, but it can't be greater than the security that came in. On page 20, lines 10 through 11, this subdivision is talking about the actual forfeiture hearing. The state has a burden to establish by a preponderance.
Sorry, my
No.
stuff.
All good.
So back to the lines 1 to 4.
Yes.
If they can't make a payment greater than the security payment, if somebody was able to waive or reduce their payment because of hardship, that affects the payment that will go out. Is that right?
Correct. So later in the bill is the section talking about the animal welfare fund and what money is coming into it. I'll let Lisa talk more about what that looks like in practice. But there isn't a ton of non-security money going into the fund. So I think some of this language is addressing the reality that if security money is not coming in, there's not going to be money to go out, or much money, although perhaps that will change in practice, but that's my understanding of kind of the current expectation. On page 20, lines 10 through 11, this subdivision is talking about the forfeiture proceeding and what the court has to find. So state has the burden established by the preponderance that the animal was subjected to cruelty, neglect, or abandonment. The court has to make findings of fact and conclusions of law. The findings have to include the total amount of all costs incurred by the custodial caretaker. And the addition here is, and the court has to find the amount the person claiming an interest in the animal is able to pay. So there was some discussion about, if the court is going to be ordering, making a finding about the cost of care and ordering the defendant to pay that, it was the understanding that they would not be ordering the defendant to pay something they have absolutely no ability to pay. So this specifies that the court is, as they do with many other things, making some kind of ability to pay finding. And this was a suggestion from Lisa. So if you have other kind of substantive questions about that, I think she will be the best person to address them. All right, moving forward, we're at the top of page 22. The first of these two changes on line 2 and line 6 are, again, just clarifying amounts of money. So on line 2, we're talking about the person having to make payment for the remaining costs of care. And adding that it's less any security paid is just saying, court's going to make a cost of care finding. That's going to cover everything that it costs the custodial caretaker to take care of the animal for that period. If the defendant has paid security in already, that counts toward what they're being ordered to pay. So that's just the change on line 2, is clarifying you're not going to have to double pay if you've paid security in, which is the circumstance where you could otherwise be in the situation of potentially double paying. On page 22, line 6, this is talking about if the defendant does not pay the final custodial costs, they can be paid out of, and they shall be reimbursed out of the animal welfare fund. But again, this is out of remaining security. So money going to custodial caretakers is always going to be, at least here, what is left after security has been paid in or already paid out. On lines 8 through 10, this is another of those key changes that I flagged up front. This is one of 2 places where Senate Judiciary added that failure to pay would result in forfeiture of the animal. So here we're talking about Here we're talking about an order of forfeiture has not been entered after the hearing, but the court found that there was a basis for the search warrant, which is the only scenario where costs of care are being imposed. To get the animal back, the person has to pay those costs of care. And here this is saying that if the person does not pay that amount within 14 days of the final order, title to the animal shall be forfeited. And that's unless there was a financial hardship reduction or waiver request pending or granted. So you do have to pay to get your animal back, but that doesn't apply if a financial hardship reduction or waiver request is at play. On page 22, lines 18 and 21, again, this is caregiver to caretaker for uniformity of usage. The next change is on page 24, lines 6 through 8. This is making kind of the same change for the appeal. So this subdivision requires someone appealing a forfeiture order to post security. And this provides that if you don't timely pay that, then you forfeit title to the animal, which has otherwise been seized, right? Like if you're appealing an order, it means they found you forfeited the animal. But this does not apply if a financial hardship reduction or waiver request is pending or has been granted. The change on lines 8 through 10 is another Senate finance related one, referring to, because the previous language referred to setting the security amount and payment schedule in rules, this is stricken. And the change on lines 12 through 15 is similar to one we talked about above, that the director of animal welfare paying out to the custodial caretaker is not paying out more than the security that came in. And they're doing it upon, the director of animal welfare is making the payment upon receipt of proof of expenditure of funds by the caretaker. We are nearing the end. Page 25. We're now in Title 20 in Section 3202, talking about the division of animal welfare. These 2 changes, so these 2 subdivisions, 1 and 2, so this is lines 17 through 22, they're referring to the kinds of rules that the Division of Animal Welfare shall adopt. This strikes reference to rules that would set the amount of security required or payment schedules. Again, to kind of Senate finance change related changes. I'll just flag this section on page 26 is the Animal Welfare Fund section that talks about what money is coming into the fund. So there are some surcharges, I believe, on animal welfare offenses. If you're convicted, there's a related surcharge. Some of that revenue is going into the fund. Appropriations can go into the fund, and this specifies that security is going into the fund. It goes to the court and transferred to the fund. This was a change made by you before this went over to the Senate side. But just as a reference for your question, Representative Rachelson, that security is one of the larger theoretical buckets for what's in the fund, which is part of the reason for limiting what money is coming out of the fund. Section 8 is a new section. This I mentioned at the beginning, that until permanent security is established, this bill sets in session law kind of interim security that would apply. There are two categories. So I guess the first language is a change made consistent with the Senate Finance request. So this says on or before December 1st of this year, Director of Animal Welfare has to report back to House Judiciary and Ways and Means, Senate Judiciary and Finance, proposing the amount of the security and the proposed payment schedule, including proposed statutory language. And then until legislation establishing the amount of security and the payment schedule takes effect, security shall be required pursuant to the subsection. Two categories, one for everything other than livestock, and then one for livestock. I think the understanding is that eventually there will be much smaller delineation between kinds of animals and what it costs, but for interim purposes, this is necessarily a little bit more general. For all animals other than livestock, security is $1 per animal per day for food. And if the seizing officer determines that immediate veterinary care is required to protect the animal's health or safety, $250 per animal for veterinary services. And then for livestock, security shall be required in the amount of $2.50 per animal per day for food. And if the seizing officer determines that immediate veterinary care is required to protect the animal's health or safety, $500 per animal for veterinary services. And that takes us to the end of change made by the Senate.
The dollar a day for food or the 250 seems incredibly low. I don't know how that was set, but
I'll let
my cat for $1 a day.
I'll let Lisa explain more. These came from Lisa's experience, with the caveat that they are likely lower, at least somewhat, than what will be set in the final amount. There was some caution about setting an interim amount that would be higher than what the ultimate amount was, but I'll let Lisa respond to that.
And there's no like third bucket, like if you have a cat, you're buying cat litter. If you have a gerbil, I mean, there are sort of other expenses with certain animals.
And those would be included in the cost of care that a court would order at the end, but at least for security, it is covering food and the necessary vet care, which won't happen in every scenario necessarily, but
If it does, those rates are probably really good or low.
Ian,
For the last page 27, so for the emergency seizure by a humane officer, there's no determination for the veterinary care. It has to be done, I think. So do we think that this would cover that veterinary service as well, or is it only in situations where the humane officer makes that determination?
as drafted, the humane officer would still have to make that determination. You're right that the language should track pretty closely, that if you have an emergency basis to seize the animal because their health or safety is
Yep.
in danger, you also probably need to get them vet care.
Yeah,
So I don't think it has to be like a separate determination necessarily. Like in some ways, you're making that determination and justifying the emergency seizure.
yeah,
But it's certainly intended to also apply in that scenario. But maybe there's a factual circumstance where
yeah,
they would not be coextensive.
okay.
So maybe a question for Lisa on examples.
And then my only other question was. On page 22. So if I understand the change now, someone theoretically could sort of win the forfeiture hearing. So the state sees the animal, either emergency or warrant, whatever. They go through the process. The defendant wins. The animal is not going to be forfeited.
Yep.
But if they cannot pay for the money that was used to take care of the animal in the interim, then they would also be forfeited.
If they cannot pay because of a financial hardship waiver, they are not forfeiting the animal.
Yeah,
So title is forfeited unless, so you don't pay, you forfeit title unless you have financial hardship, production or waiver pending or granted. So if you cannot afford to pay, you are still getting the animal
Yeah.
back. But if you can afford to pay and you don't, then you're forfeiting title to the animal. So I think Lisa could speak more to where the suggestion was coming from, but I think as the committee knows, the tension throughout this section is how do you incentivize people to pay the security at all?
Yeah.
If the alternative is they wait and could get their animal back eventually without ever paying in. But very much a policy decision. For
yeah, I just want to make sure I understood it.
Yes.
Cool, thank you.
I have a question for Hillary.
Yeah,
well, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Just a clarification question.
Mhm.
I thought I got the answer as we went along, but humane officer, I would have thought that they work for the director of animal welfare, and maybe they do, but on page 24 and line 18, the way I read it is it separates it out as being a separate entity, I guess, as humane officer, the director of animal welfare, or the secretary of ag. So does the humane officer work for animal welfare? And if not, who are they?
I'm going to defer to Lisa on that. My understanding is that there are some humane officers that do not work for the director of animal welfare, that you can be a humane officer without being part of the division of animal welfare. But Lisa will,
Like the local humane society, maybe, or?
local
Or is
municipalities.
it-
It's a broad definition, like a ton of
Okay.
people fall within it.
Right. So it could be,
I think there's some
they
local
could come from a
can fall.
number of different, okay, no, that's fine.
It's a good question for me to learn too, but I'm going to make Lisa answer it in the first instance.
No, that's good, I'm good. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Hillary. Lisa, we're all here melting in like 90-degree weather. We don't have AC. So are you available later this afternoon to Zoom in again? I think we originally were going to look at around 3:00. I think we're going to have another break from the floor, is my understanding. Are we not? We think. So I'd like to give us all a little break to catch our breath, and I might see if room 10 or one of those other rooms is available. That is not so toasty. So we'll be back. Are you available? First of all,
I am, yes.
yeah, let's do that, because I think we're all melting in here and melted probably. So thank you very much, and we'll be in touch when we kind of understand. We'll give you as much leeway. No, what's the word I'm looking for? Oh, see, I'm melting. Heads up as far as timing. So thank you.
Thank you. I'll see you this afternoon.
Thank you. We'll go off live and